Welcome to Talking Absolute Worship. We are down to 3 this week. There should be 4, but we've sent Lithan off down to the spa with a suitcase to stock up on work-related items. So hopefully she'll be back later, bulging suitcase in hand. Until then, though, we have got a fantastic panel who are going to help us with these Palm Sunday readings. There's 2 options this week. You could do Palm Sunday, or you could do Passion Sunday. If you're doing Passion Sunday, you're on your own, because we're not interested in that. We're just doing Palm Sunday because that's the right one to do. So, Ruth, how are you reading these readings this year, and how are you going to work with them with your congregation?
Yeah, well, I had a really interesting time looking at this because, of course, Luke's version of the Palm Sunday doesn't have any palms. So that kind of knocks you sideways for a start. And the other thing, which sorry, not that I have a great following, but other people will have heard me say in other circumstances probably that if a reading starts with immediately after that, blah 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 blah,
Mm-hmm.
it always makes me look to see after what is the gospel writer linking. So this one, depending on your the translation you look at, I'm looking at this one that says, after telling a parable to the crowd at Jericho, Jesus went on ahead and going up to Jerusalem. Some translations say, after saying this, Jesus went, and it's like, this. So, at the risk of misleading people by making you look at something that's not in the lectionary reading, actually, you're going to look at something that isn't in the lectionary, because I went to the backwards lectionary thing, and the parable. Yeah, the parable is not in the lectionary at all. So we never look at this parable. So again, I thought, ooh, I think I ought to, because Luke thinks it's important enough to say, oh, he told this parable, and then he did this thing. So what's the parable? It's the parable of the £10 or the 10 minas, and that's not lamp and stuff. That's minas.
Or the bird.
So, sorry. Oh yes, which has got an H in it, I think. It's not that. £10, let's call it, which is very like the parable of the talents. And when I looked at it, I thought, oh yeah, it's like Luke's version of the parable of the talents, except that it's quite different because, as well as the fact that people get equal amounts instead of different amounts, it starts with this king going off to a foreign country because he's going to be promoted, or some ruler, and the people say, "Oh, we don't want him to be the ruler." There's a lot of faff around the story. So I did a little bit of diving in to find out what is going on, and found, and this is really up to the minute, J.C. Ryle. He was Bishop of Liverpool until March 1900. So
Pretty
really
contemporary.
top-notch modern commentary. But I found it really helpful. He describes this parable as a prophetical sketch of Jesus and the kingdom. Now, we're probably used to thinking that Jesus is perhaps one of the characters in the parable. But there's this warning that this person with the money, giving the money to the servants, is going away. So Jesus is clearly warning people he's going to be going away. He's going to be leaving them to do stuff on his behalf, and then he's going to be coming back. And then when he comes back, in the parable, when the ruler comes back, he calls them all to account, and he rewards them, or he brings them to judgment, and his kingly rule is kind of established. So I think that Luke wants us to read that parable and think about what Jesus is teaching, the parable about Jesus' kingly rule, and then to read this bit, so that with our knowledge of the full New Testament and lots more besides, we see in this parable kind of glimpses of Jesus saying, the ruler is not around all the time. Sometimes you've got to get on with it by yourself. Sometimes you've got to trust, and then see what happens when the ruler returns. So this idea of the parable being a prophetic sketch, getting us ready for the crucified, risen, ascended, crowned and returning King of Kings, I thought, well, then maybe Palm Sunday can be seen as another prophetical acting out of Jesus' kingship. So he rides on a colt that has not been ridden. So we've got no donkeys. I mean, it's Palm Sunday with all the good bits out. No palms, no donkey. It's an unridden colt. So Jesus is doing something new, something nobody has done before. So he's in this prophetical acting out of his kingship. He's saying this is a new way of doing things. The words, the kind of code word bit about how they get hold of the donkey, the Lord needs it, whatever that means, how it had all been set up. You can go down rabbit holes if you want to with that. But it's not just about the moment and people responding. There's something bigger going on. This is about God's plan. There's a whole big story going on. Then Jesus sets off from the Mount of Olives, and I think perhaps we're all used to the idea that the Lord's anointed will come from the Mount of Olives. That's the way the Messiah will come. So he is chiming in with things people are expecting. There's rejoicing and praise, and they use the words from Psalm 118, and I'm not going to say too much about that, except that's why that's sitting there in the lectionary, I think, to help us see where those words come from. The Pharisees say, stop. And he says, well, no, you can't tell my followers to stop because the stones would shout aloud. So I think Jesus is saying this is not just crowd hysteria, and he's not just going along with what people expect. Again, there's kind of a bigger plan and a bigger story, and this is a prophetic acting out of something much bigger about Jesus' kingship, rule. So all in all, I think for me, the parable and then the action lead to this overturning of expectations, the kind of warnings of what's actually going on, helping us to get ready for the unexpected that's coming. And that left me wondering, for our worship on Palm Sunday, how do we recover that sense of overcoming our expectations? Because we trot along on Palm Sunday. Well, you could say, well, we read Luke and people go, where's the palms and where's the donkey? That's one way, I suppose. But I think we want to do something a bit more profound. And I've been reading recently Humble Church by Martin Percy. I don't wholeheartedly recommend it. Sorry, Martin Percy, if you're watching. But there are some very good bits in it. And I think his idea of being a humble serving church rather than being a surviving church or a growing church or a desperate church, I think that's very helpful. And I think for Palm Sunday, I want to say to people, or I want people to get people thinking, what did you think the church was about? What did you think Jesus' rule was about? And is Jesus still overturning our expectations? And instead of this Christendom model that we thought, oh yeah, that's it, and then we speak to power, we're the Christian church and people like to belong to us because we're kind of, we're the in thing. We're now discovering what it's like to be a very small pocket of society and to be leaven in the lump. And sorry, back to parables, but so I think there's something about recovering a sense of overturning expectations and recovering a sense of Jesus doing something a bit mad to get people to think and to overturn expectations. So that's where I went, thanks to the Bishop of Liverpool, who retired in March 1900. So J.C. Ryle, not a name I knew. But
he may still be going, but I think it's unlikely.
If he's watching, good on you, J.C.
Good job, Bish. I usually, and so I'm glad you did, because I usually, that if I read after he said this, I go and have a look what he said, but I didn't bother this time because it's one of those passages that I know what this is about, which was Palm Sundays every year. We do this every year, so I didn't, and that's fascinating. I presume the reason the lectionary doesn't have John's account is because they include someone else's account of the parable of the talents, and so we've got that covered. And it kind of makes me think, and this is perhaps not really a preaching question, maybe it is a preaching question about how the lectionary works, and it's the proponents and anti-proponents and blah blah. But one of the limitations I think of the lectionary is that they do say stuff like that. Yeah, we've got that covered, so we won't use John's version. But each of the gospel writers position their stories deliberately. And so it is saying something different in John's gospel than it is saying in Luke's gospel when you have that parable, even if it isn't the same parable, but I suspect it is. But that John is using it in a particular way, and they've all deliberately done it. Kind of reminds me, I don't know if you saw the news recently, Adele, a popular singer, I believe, in the popular music charts, insisted to Spotify that they couldn't have the shuffle button on her albums because she puts the tracks in a particular order and you have to listen to them in that order. So Spotify have removed the shuffle button from albums because artists order the material deliberately in order to say something. And so now you have to make your own playlist in order to be able to shuffle the songs. So you can make her album into a playlist and then shuffle it, but you have to do the extra work. And I think that's perhaps a really serious point that I hadn't actually quite connected until you said that, Ruth, about this clearly links to that parable in John's narrative. And so I think you do have to make something of that. Because let's face it, the congregation is going to say the same thing. After what? After he said what? What did he say? And immediately from there, he went, where? From where? Where did he go? So it's useful to know, isn't it? So I think that's cool. The whole not donkey stuff, it's a cult. I don't even know what a cult is. So I just profess my innocence. Is that like a baby horse? No, that's a foal.
A baby horse, isn't it?
That's a foal, surely.
I think there's a number of different words. Keep talking, I'll Google it.
A cult.
In my mind, I have a phrase, from when you hear a Bible story so many times. In my mind, the phrase is something like the colt, the foal of a donkey. So I don't know if we get that phrase in another gospel.
But then you've got like a hinny and a.
I know. Then what is that? What is that exactly?
One of them's a donkey and a mule, and one's a mule and a donkey, and they're different.
Okay. Strictly speaking, a colt is an uncastrated male horse, pony, donkey, or mule younger than 4 years of age.
Right. So the key is the uncastrated.
Well,
why is that an important detail? Why is that an important detail? You could just translate that.
Male four-legged thing. So maybe it is a donkey, but it's never been ridden before, and it's young, and it will be skittish and difficult, you would think, especially having not been snipped.
Is that the reason for the castration? Is it to calm them down?
It is in my book.
Right. So yes. So to help our congregations, we should say Jesus. No, I won't use that word. Jesus got onto an uncastrated equine type beast. It was less than 4 years old. Right, okay, we sorted that one out, so that's cool. It might have been a donkey, so that's cool. So we don't have to lose the donkey completely if you want to make the connection with the Christmas story somehow. I don't know how you'd do that, but you could make a connection, couldn't you? However, the preparation thing, the master needs it. I've tried that in markets and stuff. It doesn't work. The Lord needs it. Can I have that pumpkin? The Lord needs it. No, it doesn't work, does it? But so some preparation has happened here, which kind of makes me think, as you said, Ruth, this wasn't just people responding as, oh, that's a surprise. Nice to see so many people just turning out because I've just happened to be coming into the city. This is like a planned protest action, isn't it? It's like those imaginative things that young people do nowadays to attract attention with a publicity stunt action thing. It's actually planned. Jesus has planned this deliberately as an entrance, which I think is really cool. Kind of half makes me wonder whether one way of responding to Palm Sunday is for congregations not to blarp on about an action 2,000 years ago that made sense then, but to actually go out on Sunday and do a planned protest action in their town or village or city with huge imagination and do that for Palm Sunday, do their own one that makes sense today. But I don't know, what would that look like? Maybe we don't need any uncastrated animals for that. You could do your own thing. Rachel.
Yeah, I was just thinking, obviously, there'd been some planning on the part of Jesus, but it sounds as though the disciples have not really been party to that planning because, they need the code word. And, maybe it could have been the ostriches at the river, to go back to last week's reading.
Yeah, we definitely had ostriches last week.
you just get a set, we don't ever really get much sense of Jesus doing stuff on his own. We hear about, he's gone, he goes off on his own sometimes, but the idea that he must have done some of this sort of practical stuff. It must have happened, I'm sure, but it came as a revelation to me, thinking, never really thought about, Jesus sort of, doing these kind of things and not telling his disciples what he was doing.
I kind of I always imagine it, and I don't know if this is just me making stuff up, but when political demonstrations and activism happens, you will have people who are the ones who are responsible for starting songs and moving around, encouraging stuff, aren't they? That's what the activists do when there's crowd stuff, and maybe that's what was happening when they had the Free Barabbas stuff. Maybe there were government activists or Sanhedrin activists or whatever in the crowd whipping up, saying, "Say Barabbas, say Barabbas," and so I kind of half wonder whether the disciples were involved at some point in working out what was going on here, and they were working the crowd a little bit to get this chant going and whatever. I don't know what to make of it, but I like the idea that Jesus is some kind of activist planning an activist stunt, because it's a kind of a stunt, isn't it? But that kind of makes it sound like you're cheapening it, but I don't think it is. It makes Jesus into someone who's directly challenging the empire in that kind of deliberate way, which is often something that churches shy away from. No, we don't want to be political, we don't want to deliberately challenge something. We'll do the right thing, and if people join in, that's great, but not a deliberate provocative is the right word, a deliberate provocative stunt to poke the empire does make this into something else other than just a misguided crowd who cheer and then don't cheer, which is how this is normally presented, isn't it? And Jesus almost reluctantly walking through it, going, "Oh yeah, you don't know anything yet," and sort of reluctantly accepting the cheers of the crowd. That's a different presentation of the whole thing, isn't it? Pick one or the other. I don't know how you go about that. So that's cool. Thank you, Ruth. What about you, Rachel? What direction were you going to take these readings in?
Well, you talk about Jesus going reluctantly through it. I always go reluctantly through Palm Sunday because I absolutely hate it, have to say. And we'll
get our cards on the table. Yep.
I think it's often easy to latch onto the kind of, even the fact that in my Bible it says the triumphal entry somewhere kind of annoys me because I'm thinking it's kind of putting a slant on it, and churches sort of jump on this whole Palm Sunday, so it's like it's a mini celebration, not quite the Easter celebration, but it's all let's have parades, or let's have people marching around and shouting Hosanna and have a wonderful time. And I'm always thinking, but it's not, we know what's happening next, we know what's to come, and so I can't ever fully I feel really get into the whole Hosanna hurrah thing, and then I find that I'm at a loss, because I feel like there's quite an expectation from churches that Palm Sunday, so I do find it difficult, and I've been down several rabbit holes in thinking about it for this year, and I did exactly what Ruth did in going back to the parable that went before, and like Ruth, I thought, oh yeah, I know that parable, and then I thought, the pounds though, that's weird. So then I read it, and like Ruth, thought, yeah, that's really weird. Don't think I've ever read that before. And I must have done, because I have read, through, at some point I've read through, I did the whole Bible in a year thing once upon a time, and have read the gospel since, but I just don't remember that story, that parable at all. And at the beginning of the parable, just trying to find it, it says that this is in chapter 19 verse 11. It says that Jesus went on to tell them the parable because he was near Jerusalem and because they supposed that the kingdom of God was going to appear immediately. So I could kind of imagine the scene building up that, oh, we're getting near Jerusalem. Oh, this is going to be something massive's going to happen. And those people who were really hoping for the great political overthrow and whatnot, oh, the kingdom of God's going to come in a massive way. It's all going to be, everything's going to be different, the day after tomorrow kind of thing. And Jesus is sort of like, well, hang on a minute. And really sort of drawing them back. And I think that the question that one of the questions the parable raises about what does living faithfully actually look like? What are we going to do while the master's away? And the whole idea of this kind of unwanted leadership as well, I thought was really challenging. They didn't want this person to be ruling over them. All very interesting stuff. And then when you do get to the set reading for today, Phil's disappearing in the background.
I'm listening, you're fine.
I'll be back in a moment.
When we get to the set reading, Luke is really emphasizing the kingship of Jesus, I think, through his depiction of the story, but also highlighting that they shouldn't expect the kind of political establishment. And I think the idea that the parable is raised of people not wanting Jesus to be king, we kind of hold in our minds as we've got the hurrah, the hosanna, welcome to the son of David, or whatever it is they say, I can't remember, all of that stuff. And yet in my mind is they don't want Jesus to be king. They don't want this person to be king. So I just thought there'd be an interesting thing to explore, perhaps to do with what are our expectations of Jesus? What are our expectations of Palm Sunday, perhaps as well? Do we really want Jesus to be king? What does that look like? What does our faithful living look like when sort of measured up against what Jesus is saying? So I'd probably want to be less on the Hosanna side and more on the actually do we want Jesus to be our king today still? And if so, what does that mean? I did go down a bit of a donkey rabbit hole. I know it didn't say donkey, but it sparked
a donkey.
It could
An
be
uncastrated donkey. It would be. Yeah.
Because I was thinking about, I had a conversation with my husband and he was saying, just think about what it's like when you drive down a road that's just been resurfaced, and, or think about when you just walk on a new carpet and you've got nothing on your feet, and what did the animal feel when they, to have these things spread out on the ground? How did it feel to be walking on those things? So I did go off on a bit of a donkey tangent. I was thinking about, how this might have felt. So then I was thinking more about that animal as a working animal, because we assume that it's a kind of beast of burden type thing. And then my train of thought took me to the Garden of Eden, because I was thinking we only kind of put animals to work because of, where it all began, and all this idea about humanity's relationship with the created world. So I was there, and then this is really very, very, very much rabbit hole stuff, because then I was thinking about Adam and Eve and turning leaves into clothes. And then I was thinking about, I know we haven't got branches in this particular story, but I was thinking about people like casting off their clothes. I mean, it was very, very, I probably don't recommend you exploring this in a sermon, but I just thought it was really interesting, because I wondered about, we sort of think about them laying clothes as a kind of mark of respect, but what if it's about vulnerability? What if we are doing something different with that? Could it be an act of submission? Or and I know it doesn't appear that in the context, but I don't know, what are we saying if we were the ones taking off our coats and laying them down. What would that be about? So I don't have answers, but I have lots of questions, basically. I'm sorry, I don't like Palm Sunday.
I think you've got that across successfully, Rachel. I think so. A few weeks ago, what were we talking about? If someone asks you for your cloak, giving me a pants too, or something like that, and Peter was talking about removing his clothing during the service, and it was never entirely clear how far he was going to go with this. But he was going to then take the coat that he'd taken off, or his jacket. He was going to take his jacket off, and then he was going to instantly donate it to a homeless charity in St Albans or whatever it is that they are. So we've started to cover that, and congregations are already, who've been following Talking Absolute Worship, are already familiar with taking their clothes off in worship. You might want to develop that. If you look back at that episode, you could take up some of the threads that Peter took up, and they've already all given away their jackets. So they've lost one thing. I always kind of have an image in my head of them throwing their cloaks on the road, like they go, "Yay, cloak! Yeah, road, donkey!" And the donkey goes past their bit of the road, and then they run back in the road and get the cloak back again. They must have done, surely.
Though if they did. It's been walked on by a donkey.
Yeah, we know where you're going, Ruth.
It's quite an excited donkey. I think it is quite an act of submission to put your coat down, because you might not want it back so much when you get it. It's been, yeah.
It's a bit of a brush. It's still good. It's still good.
Maybe trodden in by the donkey. Just saying.
I don't know. Yes, and not to make light of what Rachel's saying there, because I think that is.
No, and I think. I mean, I think probably I'm Talking Absolute Worship last year or the year before. I used the video, the one from Jesus Christ Superstar, with the kids all singing "Hey, Hosanna," which does go into a nice minor key, and kind of brings back the darkness. But even the beginning bit, like Rachel, I get less and less happy with it. And maybe we need to take people back to the meaning of Hosanna, and it isn't just hooray. It's Lord save us.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe, and that's where, looking at the psalm, yes, the psalm is very giving thanks and celebrating, but at the core of it, but this is the God who will save us. So maybe instead of getting people to wave their palms and sing "We have a king who rides a donkey" and say Hosanna like it's just a word that means nothing, perhaps you should get them screaming "Help! Help! God help!" Now, what would you say? In which circumstance would you say that? God help, and then what help would you expect? And what help does Jesus, in the way that Jesus rules, what help does, if you're suffering and you say, "God help" to Jesus, Jesus goes and does more suffering. He doesn't take away people's suffering at that point. He doesn't do the whole, "Right, I'm in charge, Romans out of Jerusalem, Sanhedrin out of Jerusalem, let's start again." We know he takes the route of suffering. What does it mean for us when we're suffering to ask God for help and find what God does is send Jesus for more suffering? So there's a lot more to Palm Sunday than just having a party. And I think we've got to try and get that across to people. And I hope we'll find in our congregations people who, like the three of us, and certainly Rachel's expressed it very, very well, are not content with some sort of celebratory and that'll do, and we'll do the sad stuff on Friday, and then we'll be happy again next Sunday. So we don't have to stay long. What does it mean to make Jesus the King when we are at our most desperate and at our most sad, recognizing that Jesus is not going to offer the quick fix? And the parable says that there's not a quick fix, there's a waiting period, and Palm Sunday says that Jesus enacts this thing, and then, of course, in the rest of Holy Week, continues to enact a king who will not sweep away our suffering in a trice and make it all right. We've got to get to grips with that.
I'm always in two minds about it. I quite like connecting this Jesus entering into Jerusalem with John the Baptist's prepare ye the way of the Lord. And I always get slightly confused in my mind which song you're supposed to play at which occasion. I think, oh yeah, it's that we can sing prepare ye the way. I thought, oh no, that's not that one, is it? That's for that's for John the Baptist. I've missed it again. You have to sing the Hosanna one when you but I think the two are similar things that provoke similar thoughts. And I kind of like the question, and I forget which one of you raised it now. What it was Rachel. What do we want Jesus to be king? What does that mean? And the thing I was looking for earlier on, distracting Rachel whilst peering behind my magic curtain, was the book by Borg and Crossan called The Last Week, where they open with quite a powerful image that they spell out of two processions coming into Jerusalem. And if you come across it, look up Borg and Crossan the Last Week, and they'll describe and they can almost present it as if they're coming in at the same time. I think that's possibly fanciful, but if Jesus has planned this, then maybe they are coming at the same time, and that's the point of choosing this day for activism. You have to pick the right day to do it if you're going to be a successful activist. So from one end of the city, in is coming. It's Pilate, isn't it? Yes, or is it Herod? I'm getting it mixed up now. Which one's coming in? Pilate.
I grab my book.
Okay, get the book. One of them, I think, is Pilate coming in. Yeah, it'd be Pilate. That makes more sense. On a big white horse, and the kingly thing to come and make sure that everything's fine during Passover in case of trouble breaks out and whatever. And then as Jesus deliberately coming in very differently, presenting an alternative choice at the other gate, at the other end of the city, and which parade do we choose to attend, or in which king do we put our trust? And so I think I just really like that image. I wouldn't want to lose the parade image, but I think it does need some unpacking for people as to what questions it brings for us. Yeah, Rachel.
Was there also, I might have made this up, but in that chapter by Borg and Crossan, was there also a thing that with this sort of imperial kind of procession, crowds were kind of choreographed, you were sort of mandated to go and cheer whoever it is that's coming in, and that, so it gives images of like some of those pictures from North Korea where you've got parades, and then you've got people who are, oh hurrah, and how wonderful everything is on the sidelines, because that they're being told that that's what they've got to do, and then you sort of imagine that the other procession, Jesus' procession, is although the disciples may have been in the crowd stirring people up to join in, we hope it was more spontaneous than that.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm maybe just reverse engineering it from activist demonstrations that I've been on. Is that what happens nowadays? So I'm assuming that's what happened then, and it may be completely wrong. Just into my head there, and I haven't thought this through because I only just thought about it when you were saying that alternative processions. Is it what the Sex Pistols? There's an obvious place to go. They came on a barge down the Thames, didn't they, singing their version of God Save the Queen under a fascist regime. Was that on a particular day that they did that to coincide with something? I'm guessing it must have been, but I can't think. So if people want to go and look up the Sex Pistols coming down on a barge singing God Save the Queen, whether that coincided with the national...
The timing could have been the Silver Jubilee, couldn't it?
Yeah, I've suspicious something like... And for those who remember those years, this is, in my head, this is a very similar kind of thing. It's a deliberate reversal of another parade or thing that's going on. Yeah, Rachel.
It's an aside, but my daughter's got a Sex Pistols t-shirt that's got the Queen on the front with the safety pin through wherever it is, I can't remember, and she wore it to school the other week, and she was most put out because everyone kept saying to her, oh, do you like the Queen? I said, no, it's not the point.
Yeah, well, Andrew Rossendale, MP for Romford, recently demanded that the BBC play the national anthem at the end of every day to mark the Queen's whatever Jubilee it is this year. Newsnight a few years ago, when he last demanded it, at the end of Newsnight said, "We are happy to oblige," and then they played the Sex Pistols. So there you go. So yeah, puncturing something that's already going on. I got a bit. I don't think distracted is the right word, because I think there's some mileage in it, and it might be the direction I go in. The sort of repeated image of stones going on in these readings. So in Psalm, the stone that the builders rejected has become the chief cornerstone. So that leads you into what kind of stone are you building your house on? You could sort of push that out into the parable of the sand and the rock. Don't build your house on the sandy ground. But actually this psalm, yes, that's the one. This psalm seems to be saying the opposite. You don't pick the obviously tough stone, pick the one that's been rejected by the builders, which sounds like not the right stone to choose to put as your cornerstone, because the builders would know, wouldn't they? So I thought there was something in that, but only because then, of course, Jesus talks about stones. If these were silent, the stones would shout out, which comes from Habakkuk, as we will all know. The full thing says, and I think the full thing is better than Jesus's little sentence. Injustice will not long prevail. The stones of the house built on corruption will cry out from the wall. I love that. This is the stones from the house of corruption, or from the house built on corruption, will cry out from the wall, is the full quote, which is really powerful, I think, and makes a link to a corrupt regime. And if you're building your house on Pilate's procession and on his kingship, or on another option that you have other than Jesus's kingship, then the stones will cry out, because the corruption will do it. But then also John the Baptist said something similar, didn't he? He said God could raise up disciple or followers of Abraham from these stones. So there's kind of a whole stony thing going on for me in these passages, which is kind of where I might go, which opens me up to having like painted stones and all kinds of stuff, or stones with googly eyes on, which I think is always cool. To sort of animate some stones. So cornerstones, stones of the temple that are not going to be left standing on top of each other. You can make your own connections to stones, because, as Ruth said, there's no palms in this one, so it's either Cloak Sunday or Stone Sunday. Oh, is that a black cap on my conker tree? Oh, it's gone. Right, sorry, carry on. So there we are, some preaching themes, 3 very different themes that could be followed, all of which connect to one another. But our usual advice is pick one. Don't try and wangle all of them into one sermon, because you will fall flat. Pick one thing and say it powerfully, rather than 3 things and try and cram them in. So there's other stuff, thankfully, that we can do, and I kind of very much get the idea that we're avoiding lots of children waving palms and throwing cloaks and going hooray in our Sunday suggestions. You've already done that, so you've already got those ideas. What were you going to think about doing, Ruth?
Yeah, I think I've used before in this. I've certainly used in other places the Bible Project, which is kind of giving overviews of different books of the Bible in an animated form, which really helps with that how things link together. So I'll just share with you. It doesn't talk about the parable of the pounds, unfortunately, but it does talk a little bit. It leads us into Palm Sunday, and it just gives kind of some of the flavour of what's going on. Here we go.
Jesus and his upside down kingdom community. And this resistance to Jesus, it ramps up, and he finally arrives in Jerusalem for Passover. As he nears the city, he's weeping. His disciples are hailing him as the Messianic king, but Israel's leaders are denouncing him. And he knows that their rejection of his kingdom of peace is going to set Israel on a road of resistance and rebellion against the Roman Empire. It will bring the city's downfall. And it's that destruction of Jerusalem that Jesus symbolically enacts as he storms into the temple and he runs out the animal sellers. He brings...
And I'll stop there because that's leading into another bit again. But I found the whole overview that offers really, really helpful to think about. The expectation of the crowd, but also the resistance and so on. I always get caught up with and on to the next bit and see how it all links together, and the animation does it for me. So I think you could use that sort of thing, or you could just help that to get your own head going over how this links together into a narrative, which I think is really important for all of us for Holy Week, and is one of the difficulties of the lectionary, that by taking a chunk we kind of lose the wider context. So it's always helpful to remember that. And then the other thing I thought I would share, which again I had fun, I remembered that, oh my goodness me, it must have been back in the 80s, I think. There was Roger Jones' musical From Pharaoh to Freedom, and I thought, doesn't that end with a kind of a party version of Psalm 118? And yes, it does. And this is fun. I'm not going to play much of it, but I'll play a little bit of it. It comes right at the end of the musical, so they've explained about the Passover and all of that, and then how all that fits in with Jesus, and then it ends up with this. Now, on YouTube where I found it, it says it's from 2015, but I think from clothing and hairstyle, you have to conclude that it comes from the late 80s, but that may just be the world that I was living in the late 80s. So I will play just a little bit of that, because it is quite nice to hear a psalm sung very joyfully, and this one is. That's that one. Well, they've got to the musical bridge, so we'll leave them with that while they all bop around a little bit. But it's quite a nice, for those of us who remember the 80s and remember Pharaoh to Freedom, it is. I like to hear all those voices singing, and I like the way they sing that song. And if you had people who remembered it, people could sing it. You could get people you can learn that chorus quite easily and join in if you want to. If that's not, then leading in a completely different direction. But I think there is something about that Lord Save Us thing again, that the trust in God, the celebration isn't just an empty celebration, but it's kind of grounded in a trust in God. That's the way I would wangle it in if I wanted to. So those are two ideas just to bring to the party.
I mean, Psalm 118 is pretty specific. Save us, we beseech you, O Lord. We beseech you, save us. So it's there in the text. I thought you were going to go with the Beatles going help, anybody help, which may be a better theme song for the entry into Jerusalem than the Hosanna one that you were talking about earlier on. I don't know. Rachel, what did you come up with in your campaign to abolish Palm Sunday?
Well, I got sort of drawn into rocks. You mentioned stones and rocks, and that was kind of that was where I went in my additional thing I might do, because I was thinking that I could have a big array. I could have like a rock concert. I could have a big array of rocks on display, and I could talk about just imagine we're here at a rock concert. What might the stones be saying to us? And so I was thinking, I could pick up a stone and say, this one would talk about the time that David the shepherd boy picked it up and used it, and this stone might tell us about Elijah building an altar, or this stone might tell us about Solomon building the temple, and this stone might tell us about the parable that Jesus told, about the rocks or whatever. So I'd kind of gone off on a rock search, and then I thought I could sort of say, can you hear the rocks kind of praising, and of course no one can hear the rock saying all of those things, and then I would say that's because because we're here to give our praise to God today, and but if we weren't doing it, the rocks would be kind of on our behalf, so to speak. So I don't know, I went off a bit, because I could just imagine I'd have loads. There'd be loads. It would be like the river I was going to have up the central aisle of church for last week. It's going to be like a quarry at the front of the church, I think.
In many churches it already is, because at the beginning of Lent, Neil encouraged everyone to have a massive pile of rubble down the aisle. So you've already got the rocks there. So you're ready. You're ready to go. If you're following Neil's massive pile of rubble. I can't remember why we had a massive pile of rubble now, but there was a good reason for it.
Just to annoy the church cleaners, I think.
I think that was probably it, yes. It wasn't about smoothing roads or anything. It was just a massive pile of rubble for some reason that Neil wanted to put down the aisle. So there we are. So presumably people will do that because they do what Neil says.
They can't pin that on the bridge, though, can they?
I like the idea of rocks as witnesses to all the biblical events. I think that's really cool. One of the children's addresses, for want of a better word, that my kids always remember and remind me about when they were small, because they had the misfortune of being dragged around wherever I went. And I must have done this more than once, but I remember the first time I did it, I built a pile of rocks at the front of the church, and I hid inside it their little tape player with a little plastic microphone on it, so that you could record things into this tape player and then play them back. So it wasn't very loud, but I had recorded onto this thing a little dialogue, or half a dialogue, and on the tape player was what the Stones would say, and then I would say my parts and tried to time it so that inside the rock pile there was this little voice would come out, and I'd hold my microphone up to the Stones. And the kids always do this impression of my Stone voice, which was hello. And it was about Jesus having a conversation, or somebody having a conversation with the rocks shouting out loud or something. But they remembered it for decades since then. So it was low. It was exceptionally low tech in those days, but it was very powerful. So I'd go for it in a slightly more professional way than I managed to do it. But, I think that gave it the charm, with it just being so rubbishly done. These Stones with a weird voice and a slight gap because I hadn't timed it quite properly, waiting for the Stones to respond. Yeah, there you go.
So thank you. I mean, I like that idea, Rachel. It feels a bit like a kind of a godly play thing, where you encourage people to remember the stories with stones and what those stones might say, and I could feel a link in my own mind with those being stories of times when God helped. I mean, I was thinking of Jesus and the woman caught in adultery, and one of those stones that was already in the hand, already ready to be thrown, and saw this story and then being put down again. That sort of a you could and I like to think people in congregations would respond to that. Jesus and the stones being turned to bread, or the temptation to turn stones to bread in the day. Yeah, we could do that. Thank you.
I think it'd be great, and you could put googly eyes on all stones.
Yeah.
They have to have googly eyes on. I did do something with a congregation. I think it was maybe Newton Abbot, where I spray painted, not spray painted, but just like spray varnished a load of stones to make them look more shiny. and put Google Eyes on them, and then advertised the service free pet to everyone who was coming. And they all got a pet stone to take away on Palm Sunday. And so it was all on Facebook. And, there's young people in Newton Abbot spread it around by like whatever. So it's free pet for anyone who comes to the service on this. And they all got a pet stone to take home and look after. So all sorts of stuff you could do with stones. I've got a tiny PowerPoint, but I can't remember completely what's in it. So I haven't even got the right one loaded up. So talk amongst yourselves for just 1 second while I load up the correct PowerPoint.
The other thing you could do. Oh,
so good.
I was just going to say the other thing you could do something with the psalm sort of responsively, or have different, I don't know, move people around a bit, have some different groups voicing different things.
Right,
I love the thought of giving everybody a stone and then putting them into small groups and saying, so which story is your stone telling you?
Ooh.
As a way of unpacking the different without just people calling out. But I'm also worried that we're all going to be taken away by the people with the funny jackets that do it round the back, because people will remember. What the thing about what the Stones were saying in the interview with the Stones. There you go.
Right, I'm up and ready now. Thank you. Right, okay, this is a picture of Gates Presbyterian Church in Rochester, New York. The interesting thing about this church, or probably lots of interesting things, but one of the things that it's known for is that it is deliberately built out of what are known as clinker bricks. And when they used to fire bricks in furnaces, the ones that got too close to the heat source, because the heat wasn't evenly spread out around the furnace, got sort of overcooked too quickly or whatever. And the makeup of the brick is different. They're slightly misshapen. They're not uniform. And they used to get chucked out. And they were called clinker bricks because when you bang them together, they make a distinct ringing sound, the clinker bricks or something. So that's why they're known as clinkers. And this church was building a new building, and they were arguing about whether to make it out of wood or out of brick. And the argument for doing it in wood was that it was cheaper. And the pastor said, we'll do it in brick, but we will use clinker bricks because they're much cheaper. And it will say something about who we are. And this is what they have on their website about these clinker bricks. I'll read it for the podcast people. That's a close-up of the bricks there, a bit fuzzy. There are many features of our church that speak of who we are. The bricks that make up the exterior walls, as well as the walls of the sanctuary, are called clinker bricks. These are basically bricks that were normally rejected by masons because they were imperfect or defective. These clinker bricks represent not only that we as Christians are all unique, but as no two bricks are the same, but also that God, as well as the church, accepts and loves us with all our imperfections, which I think is just a fantastic symbol. You can imagine the argument in the church, can't you? The pastor says, yeah, we'll build them out of clinker bricks. And someone says, hang on, what? You can't build them out of dodgy bricks. But actually, I don't think clinker bricks are dodgy. They're still strong, but they're just misshapen, and you have to build the structure around them rather than you can't have a perfectly neat set of rows that's easy to build. So I thought that was really quite a powerful image of clinker bricks. The stone that the builders have rejected has become the chief cornerstone, obviously, and extends the stone theme, which is definitely where I'm heading, I think, now. Well, Rachel has expanded it into a territory that gives me so much opportunity of extra stuff. The other thing, if we're talking about foundations, what do you build your life on? Which king coming into the thing? This is a sinkhole in southwest China swallowing up a house. You can find plenty of pictures from all around the world of sinkholes swallowing up houses if you build your house on the wrong stone, the wrong cornerstone. So again, just an image to help people think through that. I think that's all I had. Yeah, so that wasn't very exciting, was it? I also thought maybe if you were feeling adventurous and you had sort of maybe some kids, I don't know, even if you just had kids, you could get a giant Jenga in and pull out the corner Jenga at the bottom straight away. I remember we did like a cafe churchy one once where we got a few Jenga sets, and they all had them on their tables, and the concentration on their faces. It took them ages. It was great because I could just sit down and watch them all for half an hour playing Jenga. Some of these old ladies, they were just just trying to pull these blocks out before the whole lot collapsed. Of course, they were on card tables, which were a bit wobbly, so that was added some extra peril. But yeah, so that was, so you could bring Jenga in, I thought, and then there are all the other ideas that people normally have on Palm Sunday about what you do. But I also might play with the, is there a kind of a activist demonstration that we as a church can imagine and creatively deliver in our neighborhood about something that local people care about, or a matter of justice? Because I just love that bit from Habakkuk about injustice will not long prevail. Stones of the house built on corruption will cry out from the wall. I just love that. So yeah, Palm Sunday with no palms. We've got Stone Sunday, Cloak Sunday, and Ruth showing her palms. Sure, that's helpful. Thank you, Ruth. So we have been talking absolute worship for about an hour. And we have learnt about donkey anatomy, and we have really progressed in our theological thinking. So thank you to Rachel and to Ruth for joining me this Sunday. We know that you're now struggling with these texts, and you have a deadline, which is possibly this Sunday coming, if you're anything like me. And we hope that one thing that we've said has sparked a train of thought that will make it easier for you to prepare your worship and bring these texts alive for your congregation in a way that's relevant for your local community. And as we do that, same as you're doing that, I'm going to ask Rachel if she will pray with us.
I give thanks to the Lord, for he is good. His steadfast love endures forever. Loving God, we pray for your wisdom and guidance on all who are preparing to lead worship on Palm Sunday. Pray that you would help each one of us to gain deeper insights into what Jesus has done for us. And I pray that you would enable us to help our congregations to engage more fully and at a deeper level with the wonder and the miracle of all of that. So we ask your blessing on us in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.